Okay, here we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Metcalf, and I've been asked by KST to be the facilitator of this afternoon's webinar. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got an excellent panel. It's going to be a really fascinating afternoon. So the theme of the webinar is looking at ICT in school curriculum and administration. This is such a hot topic. It has so much to do with increasing efficiency, with the fourth industrial revolution, for preparing our learners for that future. But it also taps into our deep inequalities. So the tighter topic for this afternoon's discussion is that COVID-19 has put the inequality between public and private schools right in the spotlight. And we're all very conscious of the discrepancies in our education system. And we need to learn about how we can address this. How can schools be better equipped for digital teaching and learning? And we also need to see what the success stories are out there. So the purpose today is to bring you some people working on the ground, in schools, in districts, in funding, to look at what they can share with this topic. But we also are hoping that the conversation between the participants means that KST has an opportunity to build relationships with others who share an interest in improving education, improving school leadership. And one of the ways that we need to do this together is to focus on IT. I think these days we don't need a lesson again in how to use Zoom. I think everyone's familiar with Zoom. There are some features of Zoom that I want to draw your attention to, however. The first is that the only people that will have their videos on is the person speaking. And the reason we do that is so that if there are any people experiencing challenges with connectivity, they've got a stronger chance of survival. I know keeping camera on is good because it gives us a sense of the other and we feel like we're talking to a person rather than our computer screen. But just to protect the connectivity life of everyone, we won't use cameras unless somebody's speaking. The second key rule is that you all, I think, know that at the bottom of your screen, there's a question and answer box, and there's also a chat box. You can use either, but we want to make sure that this session is as interactive as possible. So we would love it if you could give questions or comments into the question and answer box or into the chat box. The last half an hour of our time together is going to be given to processing the questions and the contributions that you've made. So that's the fundamental housekeeping. We do have a wonderful IT person on hand, Mitish, and Mitish will be assisting us. Now, if I can just very quickly go through what the program is for this afternoon. We're going to invite Dean Nevutalo, Nevutalo to give a welcome address in a few minutes. Then we're going to watch a video on the KST whole school development model. And then we're going to have a presentation by Sizakela Mpatswe on that model before we get into the facilitated panel discussion. Now, the facilitated panel discussion will have opening statements by panel members. I've encouraged them to be provocative, and then we'll have a facilitated discussion with them before going to your questions, and so that we have a debate. That debate will be facilitated by Nathan and Tabiso, who are both from the Mateo district or Fazila Derby district. So that's the program. We are so glad that you've joined, and I'm going to now hand over to Dean Nevutalo to do the welcoming address. I invite you to put on your camera, Dean. So, Kaya, perhaps you could assist by just checking if Dean is with us. And Kaya, if Dean hasn't joined us yet, I'm going to propose that we go straight into the video, and then when the Dean joins us, he can give us our welcome later. I'm sure everybody will be happy with that. So first of all, Kaya, if I can ask you to confirm if our KST Advisory Board member is present. All right, let's make sure that he has an opportunity to welcome us even a bit later. And then if I could ask Mitesh if you could share the video with us.
Okay.
nayo nale mali efuna ubhutilo ayiphumi bayona futhi ayithatha e-wallet.
Thank you very much. Mitesh, please can you make sure everybody's on mute? But thank you very much for that video. The only person who's not going to be on mute is now going to be our Sizakela Mpatswe, who's the head of programs, and she's going to talk to us about what have been the achievements in terms of the district whole school development program and what her perspective is on some of the ICT or e-learning needs. Sizakele, over to you.
Thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope the video that we have just seen now has given us a glimpse of us better understanding the components that makes up the district whole schools development model as we are implementing it in the Free State. What is key and important is that the model views the school as a system, and it encourages an understanding of the whole before beginning to understand the parts. You would have seen there was an ICT lab, computer lab, a library, and also some infrastructure. So these are different parts of the whole. But for you to understand the model, it's important then to get to know these parts that makes up the whole. So today, I would like us to focus on the model's sustainability roadmap. You would understand, or if you know, that KST, we are an intervention, a support structure to the Department of Education. And as such, as we implement the program, we put in measures and ways to ensure that as we leave the system that I've talking about, that we understand the school as a system, the system does not just break and fall off because we're no longer there. In 2017, KST added a sustainability roadmap or to the model as a critical component of the program. And this sustainability model seeks to sustain the impact of the program, as I've indicated, beyond the lifespan of KST. So in the first 3 years of the consolidation phase, the DWSD, as we call it, the District Whole School Development Model, as we abbreviate it, we call it the DWSD, in Fezileta, Dabi, and Motewa District, has already started some aspects of the sustainability roadmap. And part of this different aspect include the capacitation of lead teachers, building capacity for teachers who will form a second tier to the subject advisors. Those are the teachers that are able to support schools, and those are the teachers that are able to add capacity to the district officials. And also through the sustainability roadmap, which have different strategy. I would like us to focus on strategy 4 for today, which is about investing in integration of ICT into the school curriculum in terms of teaching and learning, and also in relation to the administration and the overall leadership culture in a schooling system. And this information that I will share a bit with you today, it's informed by the survey that we have conducted as KST, which was known as Kst ICT Survey. We commissioned this survey in 2019, and in all KST program schools in Fezile, Dabi, and Motewa District. The purpose was to identify what skills, what infrastructure, what tools and competencies that are basic requirements to achieve integration of ICT on teaching and learning, whilst we do that, incorporating a blended approach. And the platform that we use, it's through using technology as an enabler. So our survey was based on that we want to find that whilst we want to implement this blended approach, and whilst we want to bring in the incorporation of ICT, what therefore are the skills, what structure, what tools or what competencies that we'll need to make sure that it is enabled. And we've got different needs and goal plans in terms of this. We've got short-term goals and long-term goals. But in terms of the current need now, as we are piloting and gathering lessons and documenting challenges. We discovered that data provisioning is a challenge for both teachers and also for learners. And also we discovered that digital literacy for educators, including for learners, whilst we focus more on educators, we also see that if educators have the right digital literacy, you know, using your cell phone, phoning, or using your cell phone to navigate other platforms, it's different. So we therefore prioritize, see that the main priority, it is the digital literacy training. And the gaps that are there, it's within connectivity. This we've also seen during the time of COVID. Most areas, especially with us, where we are predominantly working in rural areas, our model has been a local-centric. It has been using one method, the face-to-face. Now that we're integrating, we're facing challenges of connectivity, we're facing challenges of data provision, even the security of the same technology, because we know, all of us, that you need to have security even with the learners. The gadgets that they might be provided with, they should be insured so that they don't get stolen and be used for other means that were not meant to be used for. And whilst we are here, and I've said we're looking at strategy 4, and the reason we want for you to come to the platform or even think or see how you assist us, it's in terms of supporting this initiative that we've started piloting, mainly in secondary schools, through the mentorship program that we've introduced, and we are introducing a blended approach. By blended approach is that our mentors are supporting the educators and the learners using both face-to-face and visual support. And therefore, when it is not face-to-face, it requires that technology should come in. In the long term, we intend, whilst we pilot, we are designing an ICT intervention for the program, which will be part of the sustainability of the model as we have been implementing it. So in the long term, in terms of the comprehensive ICT program that we'll be implementing in the 16 pilot schools starting from next year, would like to focus on ICT training, more to know how to use platforms for teaching and learning. We also want to make sure that we provide the pilot schools with effective solutions, especially offline solutions that will allow even our learners, when they are in their respective homes, where they might not be connected to a Wi-Fi, but to continue engaging in teaching and learning. We also want to make sure that whilst they do that, they are able to use the tools. And we, as KST, we are capacitating educators with a toolbox that will assist them in a classroom where they will be able to facilitate teaching and learning, to make sure that they ignite or they bring out curiosity from the learners. Whilst doing that, bringing out, also capacitating the learners, including the teachers, in 21st century skills. We know that there are things that computers cannot do, but if people are capacitated on how to navigate these different systems, they are able to manipulate and tell computers what to do. We are talking coding, we are talking robotics currently, and those, they need the 21st century skills of critical thinking, of collaboration, of communication, and it can only be through this process that we are introducing, where we'll be able to see the learners and the teachers that have participated in our program becoming world-class teachers and be able to be competent globally wherever we can take them. And we know that this is one platform, or it's one solution that we've been battling with. According to white paper, it's white paper 7 on ICT, by 2019, all schools should have been implementing ICT, integrated ICT into teaching and learning. But it has not yet happened because of different challenges and also availability of resources. However, the short-term goals that I've spoken about and the long-term goal that I've just mentioned now, those interventions can only be fulfilled through partnerships and collaborations with stakeholders like yourselves who are here, or even your contacts that you might know can come on board to make sure that ICT and e-education is realized in the education system of our country, and also ensuring that the education environment does not only depend on one methodology to be functional. We therefore encourage you to engage with us on the ICT and curriculum gaps identified, so that we can ensure as we exit the program in the Free State that the 2 districts remain performing in an upward and sustainable academic performance. Not only that, but what the gains of those 2 districts become a replicable effect to the other districts, the other 73 districts in the country. I trust that this panel discussion will get all of us thinking, and also make sure that while we're thinking, we share strategies and we share resources on how we can make our public schooling better. Thank you, Chair.
Just unmute, Mary.
Muting. So I thank you. Apologies for not going off mute. I just want to thank Sizakele for such a lovely presentation. It was so rich. I'm glad this is being recorded because I want to think much more about what Sizakele was saying. I now want to invite the board member, the advisory board member of KST, Dean Nevutalu, to unmute, to put his camera on, and to welcome us. Before we go into the panel.
Thank you very much, Mary. I think we are experiencing some of the downsides of technology. Thank you, Mary, for the introduction and for your important role of facilitating today's proceedings. I know you will do it excellently, as much as we have already started to do so. Thank you to each and every one of you for being here with us today. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you that have been with us for a long time now, as well as those who are new to our partnership with the Free State Department of Education and the First Rand Empowerment Foundation. Today we host our first webinar, as Mary has outlined under the topic, the COVID-19 lockdown, put the inequality between public and private schools in the spotlight. This is a glaring discrepancy in our education system, prompting us to draw lessons on how the rural and peri-urban schools we work with can be better equipped for digital teaching and learning. And we are proud to be able to host it at a time when ICT, as it relates to curriculum delivery in our quintiles 1 to 3 schools, is on the spotlight. Before we get started, on behalf of the board members of KST, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you, always being here when we need you. To those who are joining us for the first time, thank you for your interest in our work. You will soon learn of the many ways we work to make a positive impact in the education landscape in the Moteo and Fezile Dabi districts of the Free State province. Truly, the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. In today's gathering, we will be taking a good look at the immediate ICT and curriculum delivery needs in KST schools, as well as the gaps and challenges faced by the education system with regards to the integration of ICT in our schools. Our objective as a partnership with the Free State Department of Education is to collaborate with public and private institutions to make education an empowering experience that equips learners with the skills and knowledge to thrive and contribute to the development of our society. Thank you for joining us in this big and yet achievable objective. You have all been chosen to be a part of our association due to a mutual dream of ensuring that our children enjoy effective and functional schools with creative spaces for them to experience the joy of learning and fulfill their educational potential. It is this passion that will help us all to unite. And the energy we create is what allows us to achieve our individual as well as group goals. We need you as much as you need us. And that's why we are grateful to have you join us today. During the next few months, you will be learning about the different initiatives through our planned activities and special events, where you will have more sight of our work and its outcomes. As I close, I usher in KST's model video, which you've already seen, which seeks to showcase the work we have and continue to do with our partners, the Free State Department of Education and the First Trend Empowerment Foundation. Hopefully, you will be inspired to join us as we build South Africa together. I thank you.
And we must thank you, Dean Nevatalo, because that was inspiring. You made us remember that there is so much to be done, but working together and collaborating, learning from each other, we will be able to achieve much more. So thank you very much for that. What I am going to do now is to share my screen and remind you about who our panel members are. No, I haven't shared that with you yet. So let me introduce the panel members. We're going to go now into a panel discussion, and the panel members that are going to be presenting are really a very special group of people. I think we're very grateful that they've joined us. And we're going to go in order with, first of all, the District Director of Mateo District in the Free State Department of Education. I work closely with Mr. Malloy and I hold him in the highest regard. So Mr. Malloy is going to kick off. He's going to be followed by Tom Shupakai, who is a maths and IT specialist at KST. And then Milford Malunga, who's the project director at Bella Matrix ICT Foundation, is going to talk. And then Riyad Ibrahim, and he is a social investment specialist. So this is how the panel's going to work. The panel's got work to do and you've got work to do. So the panel's work is that they've got 5 minutes each to just give a high-level statement. While they're talking, we want you to use the question and answer box and the chat box to give your reactions. We want you to be provocative in your challenges to them and in your questions so that we really deepen learning. After they've given their 5-minute presentation, I'm going to facilitate a discussion between them, push some of their thinking further. I've warned the panel members that they've only got 5 minutes. When their 5 minutes is nearly up, I'm going to put my camera on and start frowning so that they know that it's time to wrap up. So we've got about half an hour for this exercise of listening to people really working, getting their hands dirty with real work on the ground, in schools, in districts, in funding, in making things happen. And then in the last 30 minutes, we're going to be going to the chat box to look at the questions you've been asking. We're going to be looking at the question and answers and the questions in the question and answer box. And that's the opportunity that you'll have then to hear the answers to your questions. So I am going to thank the panel members. I'm going to ask, first of all, Mr. Malloy to put on his camera, take himself off mute and talk to us from his heart about the topic that we're looking at, IT, inequality, how do we address these issues?
Thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. Let me extend my greetings to the fellow panel members and everyone. And then, you know, as Moteo District, we are sure beneficiaries and then of the partnership between the Free State Department of Education and KST. And then because of this partnership, and then we have managed even to close the gap. And then between the schools which are marginalized in terms of the resources they have, and then in terms of the geographic positions which they are occupying. And then for sure, you know, our observation is that there is really a wide gap between the public and the private schools. And then when you look at the two types of schools, and then you will really understand that the private schools at times referred to as independent schools, and then in terms of resources, they are better off. And then in terms of, you know, the other key ingredients which make a school a better school, and then they seem to be better off. But when it comes to the public schools, the public schools is really a mixed pot, because in public schools you will have rural schools which are in the rural areas, and then I will really indicate and then what profile are they having. And then we also have got the peri-urban schools, and in the peri-urban schools, and then we'll have some of them in the former homelands. And then you will also have the urban schools. The urban schools, you will have your township schools and also your town schools. In the main, the town schools, the ex-model schools. But when you look at the township schools, you look at the rural schools, and then they are in the same basket. And then when it comes to classification, when you look at the resources, and then a school will be effective if the school is well resourced. If you look at the resources of the rural schools, the peri-urban schools, and then they are not as resourced as your private schools and your ex-model C schools. You know, when I'm talking about the resources, you will understand that in terms of HR, and then your private schools and ex-model C schools will far better off. And then therefore, in terms of the quality of teaching and learning, because they've got, you know, more educators in terms of the teacher and learner ratio, in terms of the qualification, they attract better qualified and then educators. You'll understand that they will have a better advantage when it comes to and then teachers. And then, but on the other side, and then if you have got your rural schools, and then you have got your urban peri schools, and then some of them may be challenged in terms of HR, in terms of having sufficient and then educators. It is only whereby we will be looking at the number of learners, and then when the department will be coming in, and then to employ and then quality educators, but they don't have anything to top up. That is the in terms of HR. When it comes to the learning and teaching and the material, you know, your private schools will definitely and then have an advantage because they will have deeper pockets. They will be able to have textbooks. They will be able to have ICT equipment. They will be able to have even your laboratory and ICT labs. And then that is why the partnership between the department and KST and then came in and assisted us, despite these schools not having enough resources, but that investment enabled them and then to up and then their performance, because they will have and then those resources, they will have ICT and then labs, they will have your laboratory and then labs, and so that they should be able to utilize and then efficiently. What is important? What is important?
Mr. Malloy, I'm going to say it was wonderful to feel your passion and to hear you talk about the completely different resourcing arrangements for the range of schools that you lead. But I'm going to ask you to pause there, and in the questions, I'm going to come back and ask you more about that, okay? So thank you for that wonderful presentation. I'm going to come back and ask you some questions now. So the next person is Tom. And Tom, you've got Tom Shipukai, who's a maths and IT specialist at KST. You've got 5 minutes to do your opening statement. I'm also going to only give you 5 minutes, and I'm certainly going to put my camera on to remind you that your 5 minutes is nearly up, and maybe I'll have to interrupt you if you also are as passionate about this topic as Mr. Malloy. So Mr. Malloy, if you can go off camera and go and mute. Tom, you put on your camera and unmute yourself, and it's over to you. I know Tom will have difficulties, but Tom, can you come in now? Okay, so Tom may be having difficulties. If Tom doesn't come in, I'm going to ask Mr. Milford Malunga to come in and ask Tom to join once he's resolved his IT challenges. So Milford, can you go on camera and unmute and give us your 5 minutes? Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Mary, for facilitating this this webinar. Colleagues, this is really an expose in terms of what we have seen in schools. You know, the moment when the president announced to the country that the lockdown begins on the 15th of March this year, meaning to control the spread, you know, all the educators and learners could no longer go to school. So for the rural and the peri-rural schools, this meant no possibility at all of teaching and learning. So some public schools in urban areas, which we are calling the Model Cs, the former Model Cs, they attempted to try to integrate technology in their teaching and learning. I mean, some started using the D6 communicator app, you know, to upload materials and also to send notes and activities for learners. But some even went as far as bringing in the Zoom and the Google Meet. But that was a challenge. The resources kept on coming in to limit what they needed to do, because not all the learners have access to these gadgets. So you will have a teacher creating classes even on WhatsApp to say, okay, this is what I'll do. In that space, only few learners will be able to attend to those classes because of the limitations of resources. And also the colleagues, we cannot ignore the issue of digital skills. It is a big challenge for many educators. You know, it's amazing when you get to a school and you look at the outside of the school and it's beautiful and there's infrastructure, which is the building and all that. But when you get inside, you realize that there's so much which is lacking within the educators, and some of them can't even pick up what a mouse is, and you expect somebody like that to integrate technology when you are facing a situation of this nature. So it is a big challenge. But however, in that situation, the disparities is you see the private schools, it was business as usual. I mean, because of the resources which though they were in the different environment, but for them it was business as usual. So the inequality between public and private colleagues, it's really evident. And the lockdown just exposed what we have been saying and what we have been looking at as specialists within the ICT. So it's prolonged. It does not only end in the schools. You know, I happen to work with UNISA. So I receive all these learners who are coming from those schools, specifically these these rural and peri-rural schools. Some of them, they find it difficult for them to do research, to do everything which is required. They don't know what is, or how you take the content from the website and how you do that. So many fail, not because they don't know the content. They fail because the capital culture has failed them. So we need to address this now so that we can have a better future and better leaders who are able to utilize the industrial revolution, our fourth industrial revolution. So in the schools where we have trained, because when we arrive in the schools, what has been always a template of all the other schools is it's a brick and mortar classroom. And that is where we are. That's the environment where you are. And you have plus minus 50 educators in one classroom. Plus minus 50 learners in a classroom. And some of the schools, you have even 110 learners in one maths and one science classroom. And in this area, it's only chalkboard, whiteboard, which they're utilizing. So one needs to begin to introduce your technology. We are not talking about curriculum integration. We are talking about just device integration, where when you are delivering what you have, that's the basic. When you are delivering your content, you can be able to reach more at the same time and be able to accommodate. Because I looked at 110 learners in a class. How do you deal with this with the chalkboard? And you know, so these are some of the challenges, colleagues, which we really need to begin to address. And if we are really serious about this, I think this is really the area, the content where we need to do more, which we can do. The infrastructure is needed in schools and in different areas and in different categories. What kind of infrastructure? I always like to refer back to the TPEC model. Thank you, Mary. Just last minute, the TPEC model, which I will engage later in the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Milford. Just like Mr. Baloy, you've got a passion for this area. I think you were very helpful in terms of outlining the challenges and also giving us a vision for what's possible going forward. So I think that Tom has now joined us with the IT challenges that he's experiencing. I think he's joined us from his phone. Let me just check, Tom, if you're there. Yeah, Tom, you just need to unmute yourself, and then I'm going to give you 5 minutes before I smile at you from my camera. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to take this opportunity to thank KST and everybody who has organized such a meeting. It's such a privilege to be in this webinar at such a time whereby we feel that the effects of COVID-19 has really exposed our rural schools or our less exposed schools regarding the use of ICTs in schools for teaching and learning. But I would like to acknowledge, I would like to thank our rural schools for one thing. Let me say, from the district that I come from, as much as we have not been able to have conduct meetings or conduct sessions but all our rural schools, the teachers, the principals, have been able to connect to the meetings that we have been having regarding the content or dissemination of any information. Just like us, the way we are today, we could have easily booked a venue and we all gather, expenses for traveling, probably for accommodation, probably for catering. But we are here on a webinar connecting from different places that we are at. So I want to, to acknowledge and to thank our rural schools, especially for them adapting quickly to the challenges. Yes, they knew that they are exposed. They had lack of resources for them to be able to connect. But due to COVID, they have really upped their game and they are adapting to the changes that were caused by COVID-19. So coming on to the issue of resources, yes, our private schools are really better resourced compared to our rural schools. But the dimension I want to take today, I want to talk about some of the rural schools that do have resources, but they are not being utilized. So COVID-19 came to a point whereby our rural schools had the resources available, but they hadn't taken an initiative to be trained or to seek for teacher development on the usage of those gadgets. So it means we were on a lockdown, not being able to connect to our learners, and yet people had the resources and they were unable to utilize them. So I would say to the schools that do have the resources, as a way forward, it's about us having channels on how can we train, how can we develop teachers in the utilization of those resources. So for me, there are schools that do have resources who are in the rural settings, but they're unable to use them. I would say there are schools that even have resources given to them 5 years ago, and they have never been using them because they do not know how to start and where to start using them. And at this point going forward is to say, let's identify, it's not all rural schools that don't have resources, but for those that do have resources, what is the plan that we have to capacitate the teachers to ensure that there is connectivity being provided to them? Again, still on that, one of the main challenges that we had was in our rural schools, we never had the data management system was very bad. In fact, it was poor. So we had our rural schools not even having enough information to reach out to the parents during COVID-19. So what happened is that the lockdown happened and our schools were not able to reach out to the parents, of which in the private schools, that's what they were good at. They were able to reach out to the parents. Teaching and learning was taking place on Zoom. And in most of those people, they are able to even connect using, they have reliable connectivity compared to the rural schools. So I think going forward, the data management has to be very accurate for our rural schools and ensure that we are able to connect to our parents and ensure that the teaching and learning takes place. So as well, just to add on to that, it's coming to a point of where do we start now, especially in our rural schools? Must we start teaching the computer literacy? What is the integration of content? So are these two different? How can we bring them together? A teacher who doesn't understand how to use a laptop, how are they going to integrate? So these are some of the points that we'll be sharing as we have our guided discussion to say, how and where are teachers going to start? They have the gadgets, but they lack the skill. They lack the connectivity. So what are we going to do? How are we going to bridge the gap? So in closing, I would say COVID-19, yes, there are so many effects that it has caused, but I think it has also fast forwarded the process or the agents for us to have to ensure that every school has got resources, every school has got reliable connectivity, every learner has got a gadget, and ensure that those gadgets are utilized, ensure that learners know how to use those gadgets in the schools. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was so insightful. I'm looking forward to asking you more questions about what we can do to make sure that the resources that are there are actually being better utilized. So thank you very much for that. We're coming back to you after Riyadh, and then all four of the panelists will interact with each other. around some of the issues that each of you has raised. So Tom, thank you. You can go off mute, you can go, or you can go onto mute, and you can go off camera. And I'm going to invite Riyad Abraham, who's a social investment specialist, to give his perspective on this question. So Riyad, unmute and on camera, and over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mary, and hi, everybody. I'm going to start off by saying that it's important that we temper our expectations around devices and around ICT in schools. And the inequalities that are being brought up, that are being highlighted by COVID, they are inequalities in many different things. There are inequalities in the entire approach that is taken, and what it's highlighting is not just the ICT issues, and resourcing schools with ICTs is not necessarily going to be a silver bullet. I'm not saying that it's not important. However, we do need to be kind of tempered in our expectations. We don't see, from the work that we've done, we don't just impediments to online learning. It's really about attitudinal issues and pedagogical approaches. And so, with ICT, I mean, there's a number of challenges. There's cost of replacement of assets, there's security, but above all of that, there's the entire pedagogical approach which needs to be taken into account. The important thing is that when we are doing this, when we are rolling out ICTs into schools, and that we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't simply replicate the classroom online. And I mean, I know someone mentioned that, it was almost business as usual in some of the private schools, and that, but it actually wasn't, because a lot of schools did try and replicate the classroom online and were largely unsuccessful at being able to do that. The reason that they've still been able to get through a lot of the curriculum and so on is because of the foundation phase learning that kids at those schools had, not because they were necessarily able to implement an ICT solution. There's one example I have of a private school, and I'm not going to mention the school, but they were trying to do exams in exactly the same way that they tried to do it online, the same way they would do it offline. So they would pose a couple of questions, and they would ask the parents to make sure that, the kid wasn't cheating or anything like that. But the reality behind it is that's not the way to do online learning. Online learning is a shift our entire mindset. If we try and just replicate a classroom, we're not going to achieve any learning at all. And then we're going to end up doing device dumping. And we have to be very cautious of that if we are going to be doing devices, it has to be combined with a well thought out process of how we're going to have online learning happening. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good examples in the kind of foundation and basic education space. We don't have a lot of good examples where online learning has happened, not in South Africa and not across most of the world. And so we do need to define that, and COVID is going to help us kind of understand that better and define that better. But in the absence of that strong evidence of what's the right pedagogical approaches, and that we have to keep things tempered, we have to know that devices is just one thing, but you have to, alongside the devices, take new approaches to teaching and learning in order to achieve effective teaching and learning. And the two have to go together and not just, one on its own. And so that's my input. I've got 30 seconds left.
That was wonderful and so provocative, Riyad. Thank you so much. So we do have our half an hour to now take some of these opening statements and take them further. So now I'm going to invite all 4 panelists to put their cameras on. I hope that doesn't throw people's connectivity, because I've got some questions that arise from the opening statements that you've made. And I want to start with those. Actually, the first question that I want to start with, I'm actually going to ask Tom to give us the first response. And then I'll ask Mr. Malloy and Milford and Riyadh. And Riyadh, put your camera on so we can see your wonderful face. And then I want you to disagree with each other. You've got different perspectives and different experiences. If you agree, that's fine, but feel free to disagree. So the first question I'm going to pose, and I'm going to ask Tom to respond, and then I'm going to go through the rest, is what are the 3 things that you would do to support schools to use available technologies? What is it that needs to be unblocked? So Tom, over to you, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Malloy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think one of the things that we need to establish first is that what are these resources that we are talking about? It's all about us identifying what are the available resources in the schools. Because in most cases, when we talk about the ICT tools or resources in the schools, we are talking about the laptop and the smartboard. But in some cases, most of our learners in our schools, they do have gadgets like a cell phone that they can actually use on their day-to-day, downloading question papers, ensuring that they receive their assignments, and they do the browsing through using the cell phones. So it means the first thing that we do is to ensure that the resources that are available in the school, it could be part of the school property or what learners already have. So now we need to ensure that how do we now train learners on how to use those resources. Then secondly, we need to ensure that the content that we are going to deliver using those resources, is it going to be online or offline? So the cheapest way that we have to go for is an offline viewing, because learners, most of them, when they get home with those resources, they might not have internet connectivity. So it means we might have to go offline where learners receive the content and they're able to view the content offline. And as well as thirdly, is to now ensure that on our teachers, are they able to use those tools to ensure that learners can benefit effectively. So it means teachers now needs to have a training on what kind of materials can be uploaded on those tools or on those resources. So it means above and all, it means the training of the teachers on how to utilize those resources available in the school would play a major role. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Very interesting. I'm sure that Riyadh's going to be saying something challenging in terms of attitude. But before we go to Milford and Riyadh, Tabatso, can I ask you to mute? Tabatso, please can you mute yourself? Thank you. I'm going to ask December Malloy to see what he thinks about your understanding of the context, what Tom has said, and what would you like to contribute? Then I'll go to Milford and Riyadh.
Well, thank you very much, Prof. You know, to me, the key thing, the first one, which is a priority, is availability. And then if you can make, and then all the ICT equipment which are going to facilitate effective teaching and learning available, and then I think that is a priority, because you will see the difference, and then between the schools which do have and the schools which do not, and then which will be in the main, and then you are rural, and then you are rural schools, and then you are more, and then financially disadvantaged, which may not have. And you will also link the availability with performance. Those schools which will have sufficient resources will perform better academically than the ones which do not have. And for the second one, it is not going to be helpful and then to have all those resources, ICT resources available, and they just become white elephant. They should be effective utilization. Therefore, the second thing is to ensure that there is going to be training, effective training on the utilization of those ICT equipment by both the teachers and then the learners and also managers. Because if you are not going to have a strong teacher development program, which is going to support the utilization and then of those resources, and then you may not harvest and then sufficient benefits as you may plan. I always liken it to buying someone a car, but you don't and then take the person to a driving school. The person does not even have a license, doesn't even know how to drive. But here is a car which is decorating the garage. And then the third one, if schools are going to be using those resources effectively, you will see that even the scholastic performance is going to be enhanced. And then the third one is we need to safeguard them. There is no use in investing huge sums of money, and then we unveil, we launch, and then such gadgets for use by schools. And then after a month, after 6 months, they are all gone. And then we must ensure that they are going to be safe and ensure that they may be used continuously. The sustainability is important, that it must and then have the safety of those gadgets. To me, those are the key important and then ones, Prof. Availability and then effective utilization and security. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We've got a very nice consensus emerging, but let's hear from who's next. It is sorry. So the next person to speak is going to be Milford, and then Riyadh. Milford, we need you to unmute yourself and put your camera on. I hope it's on. And then let's see what you've got to add to the 3 things that have been prioritized now by our previous speakers, and what you'd like to add or disagree with.
Thank you again, Mary. Thank you, colleagues. Wow, it's inspiring to sit and listen to your points. The mistake which many service providers, or should I say, the implementers or the saviors of schools, you may call them, is exactly what is called dumping, which I think Riyadh mentioned earlier. It's important that before you can ask teachers to begin to utilize certain gadgets, they need to have understood why they must use that gadget or that device. So the challenge which we have of many white elephants in schools is because of exactly the professional development which has not gone into these schools. Because you can go and do digital training today, teach them how to utilize the gadgets which they have, but what for? So they need to be, the devices which you have, they should be, I usually put it into what I call the TPEC model by Ruben. You have the technology, in this case, is not important. What is important is the content. So the content must influence the pedagogy, and the pedagogy will influence the technology. Because looking at the pedagogy, you are looking at how am I going to teach maths? How am I going to teach English? How am I going to teach accounting? Am I going to use role model? Am I going to use a jigsaw method? Am I going to use workstations? What am I going to use? So if these are the things which I'm going to do, then what gadgets do I need for me to be able to use this? Colleagues, some of the teachers have been in the teaching business for more than 30 years, and they've been using chalk and board. So now you are moving them. You want them to learn this digital content, to say they must be able to begin to teach. So for them to be able to teach, there should be a change of a mindset. You need to help them to change properly. Help them. They should be a change of a mindset. There should be a buy-in. It must not be an imposition to them, because if you impose it, that's where you realize that they'll be excited to receive the gadgets, and after a month or two, they'll shove them away. They go back to their chalk and board, and they continue in it. But if you start where they are and get their buy-in to say, okay, we want to do this because of 1, 2, 3, 4. So start with the results at the end, and you work it backwards. So that's where I have realized that many of the educators who have really been champions, I'm talking about the district in Vembe, and you are talking about the district in the Northwest, where these are rural schools, which we are talking about. You talk about Omukudu, Machaba. Omukudu, they did not start there. Aboputi, they did not start there. Where did they start? They started with at the basics of the basic. They looked at the need. What was the need for me to teach what I need to teach? There was a buy-in. So we need to create champions, managers in schools, managers of their classrooms. How do we do this? By bringing them in the earlier stage. The buying of devices, for me, it's the later stage. You begin where the educator is, work with their minds, where they are, move them from where they are so that they can begin to utilize these your gadgets when they have seen the importance of using these gadgets.
Thank you so much,
I
Tom.
have to say, but
No, that was very powerful. I'm going to ask Riyad to come in, but Riyad, I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball at you, because I'm going to give a summary of what we've heard so far. And I'm going to ask Riyad to add if there's anything else that he'd like to add to that summary. But I also want you to start thinking about the next question and respond immediately. So in terms of this first question about what would we do next, I think that there's several points that have emerged. Number one, people must start with what's available. That could be handheld technologies. It could be the material that exists in the school and is underutilized. But you start with what's available and you make sure that it's actually used. And that's one of the challenges. The second one is an important one that Mr. Malloy has raised, and that's the question of safekeeping. But the third one is where it gets really interesting. And all of us speakers before you, Riyad, have spoken about the need of the mindset of teachers. And I know you're passionate about that, so I'm going to push you in that direction. What we've heard is that teachers need to know what for. Why? Not that this is technology, not that this is for IR, but what for. And I think that what Tom said was very useful, Milford said was very useful, because he said you have to start with content and pedagogy and then go to the technology. And it's about a mindset. So see if you agree, if there's anything that you want to add, but where I want to push you forward is what is this attitudinal thing that we have to change? And I might be making your life difficult. The third part of the question is then how does pedagogy have to change? After you've thought about those three things and shared them with us, I want to go back to Mr. Malloy and Tom and Milford and ask them to comment on issues of pedagogy and issues of changing the mindset. And then we'll be at 4 o'clock and I'll hand over for all of the questions that I hope are being put into the chat and the question and answer. You ready, Riyad?
I am. Thanks, Mary. So I think to add to that and to move into the next question all in one, what I'm going to say is very simply, no new technology in history has needed to be pushed onto people. Mark Zuckerberg did it and people came. and they're using it because they can see a need for it. So there's a demand pull for the technology as opposed to a supplier push. And I think that that's very important in all of these contexts, because when we've got technology that is available, that is making a material difference in the classroom, that is making a difference to the teachers, immediately the adoption of it is there. And I think that, you know, when we looking at anything new, we don't need to be pushing it out. I think it needs to be useful, practical, and, you know, easy to use, efficient. And that is how teachers start to adopt it. That is how it starts to integrate into the classroom. And it's also how the pedagogical approach starts to change. And there we're looking at stuff around curriculum, right? So if, for instance, we say that in the curriculum, we know that problem solving and creative thinking are areas that's built into our curriculum, which it is, but our focus isn't on it, then we need to be asking more around what's the focus areas in the curriculum? How do we refocus onto the right areas of the curriculum that's going to push learners to be more curious, that's going to push learners to become problem solvers, and that how do we realign that focus with the teachers and the learners from a kind of a policy and kind of curriculum standards level? How do we do that? But then let it be demand driven by the teachers and the learners. Let there be assessments that require learners to actually use Google and to use the internet and to integrate their thinking and synthesize their thinking using the technologies that are available to them. So I think it's very much around the demand pull. We need to have stuff that we don't have to do extensive training on, that we don't have to take into schools and train people and, you know, make them use it. We need to not be making people do things. We need to have stuff that people find accessible and they will use it, just like WhatsApp and every other technology.
Thank you, Riyadh. I think you've really shifted the discussion here. You're saying that the technology in itself can be an instrument to spark new pedagogy, that it's going to change the way that teachers teach because curiosity is what will be tapped in order to lead. And you're also saying that will drive the demand. It's very interesting. So we've got 15 or 20 minutes, and I am going to ask Milford and then Mr. Malloy and then Tom to also add their thoughts in terms of those two questions. How does pedagogy have to change, and how do we change attitudes? So over to Milford.
Hi, Mary. You know, the pedagogy does not really. You are not really saying that probably. I mean, content. Content should be the foundation. It should be the basis of whatever we want to bring in or integrate, because you are, in this case, you are looking at teachers who are already have moved from device integration. So now when you move to curriculum integration, these guys should have already adapted, or they are confident in the use of technology in wherever area where they would go, because you don't need to be asking somebody what is Zoom, how does Zoom work, how does MS Teams work. You know, those are introductory part. How do you manipulate your spreadsheet and all the other things that should have been already taken care of. Then when you move now you're bringing the curriculum integration, which is the teaching of that topic using this gadget. which you have found the need that I want to utilize this gadget. So how does then pedagogy come in? Pedagogy comes in the sense that, okay, now I'm a business economics teacher and I want to teach the responsibilities of managers or certain staff in a company. So how do I deliver that? How do I deliver that lesson? And now you need to look at then, because you have your content and you look at the pedagogy, which is the methodology of how you're going to deliver it. The best way for me right now, when I'm looking at that topic, I'm saying, okay, I'm going to use role play because I'm looking at the roles of these managers in the business. So the methodology which I can bring in, or the pedagogy I can bring in, is role play. So when you bring that role play, what does role play need for me to what does it need in terms of tech? What tech do I need for me to do the role play? Is it a Google Drive forms, or does it need a laptop, or does it need a smartphone to take videos when the roles are being played by different individuals? You see, so in this case, you are looking at the tech, while you already know the topic of what you want to deliver, the content of what you deliver. Then in that case, it's easy for educators to say, okay, I love this. I love this. This makes my life easy to deliver this topic using this technology. So I feel very strongly when it comes to us saying, as ICT specialists, to us saying that this gadget is going to work for you. I'm working in the schools where there are smart boards. Those smart boards are sitting there. I'm asking them, what have you used the smart board for? He says, oh, I've not used it for anything. It has been there. And because they don't know what to use it for, they don't see the reason. What the smart board, for them, what the smart board can perform at that point, they can do it on the chalkboard. So now it's a challenge of us really empowering these educators in terms of how they can utilize this. You don't need somebody to come and dump a laptop or a smartphone and they give you a user manual. That is not for the educators. The educators want to see the need, the importance of this gadget, which it's a tool. It's a tool. So it makes my life easy. It makes my teaching easy and simple. And it makes my teaching interesting. You know, I used to teach accounting at school. And back then I started introducing pastel accounting, pastel for grade 10s, for grade 11s, and for grade 12s. The interest was exciting. I mean, the learners began to do extremely well. Why? But I had been teaching well. I mean, with my chalkboard, I thought I was very good in teaching. But now, when I introduced this gadget, learners could go into pastel. They could see the manipulation of what the types of businesses, the partnership, how it works, the practicality of these gadgets, of these apps being brought to them. You know, that they need to see that. And as an educator, I was excited. I wanted more. So I encouraged the school to get us more of these. That's when I went into ICT very strongly, because of seeing the need. I could not teach well the formulas of accounting, so I was not very good in teaching the formulas. So what I did was when I brought the pastel accounting, there was a section which simplified it to learners. I just gave it to them, and it even taught me as well. You know, I became a better teacher by looking and working with the pastel accounting, that app, and it was amazing. So I mean, I'm sure there are many educators like me. When they look at a gadget, they're thinking, well, how is it going to improve my teaching? How is it going to change the way I've been teaching? How is it going to inspire the learners, you know, to love the subject and so
Yeah,
that is
thank you.
my contribution.
Thank you, Milford. Now, Mr. Baloy, I'm going to ask your permission to put you after Tom. When you come, I want you to talk practically from your knowledge of your schools about how we're going to do this. But Tom, I think that what Milford was saying was fascinating, because what I heard was he was saying that in these questions, you have to have fidelity to content and to learning. And the starting place is content. And then teachers need to understand technology as a range of tools with which they need to be familiar, with a focus on learning. That the tools of IT are become a pedagogical palette from which they select what's going to advance learning. That's how I understood Milford. What are your views on that? And then, Mr. Malloy, I'm going to ask you to say, how do we get there? Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Prof. One of the most interesting conversations I've ever had in my training regarding ICT is what Milford has been talking about. To say, Tom, listen, I have been teaching business studies for 30 years, and I've been having 100% every year. So what are these tools going to change to my teaching and learning? And I always wonder how, this is the kind of thinking that some of our educators have, that they have been using the chalk and the board, and they've been getting the results. So what is the purpose of us having ICT training or having ICT tools to the learners? And another question has been to say, Tom, look, it is the Kst document. It is the technology you are bringing, the training of the computers. It is the content knowledge. They tell me, they try to separate all those things in the teaching and learning as far as it's concerned. But one of my best responses has been, there is no technology, there is no pedagogy, there is no content knowledge separate. It means technology is there to assist you to deliver the content in the classroom effectively. So these things are not separate. So it means the technology is there. It's a way on how are you going to effectively teach your learners in the classroom to have better results. And even though you are receiving better results, we are not just training learners to be good in mathematics, to be good in accounting, but we are preparing them for the future world. And the future world requires them to use the 21st century skills, knowing how to use the ICT tools, know how to type the CV on their own. We can't be having a generation whereby they go to an internet cafe and ask somebody to type a CV for them. So that is not the purpose of the education system. So it means we are not doing it for us as teachers. We are preparing our learners to be competent, not only in Gauteng province, not only in the Free State, not only in South Africa, not in Africa, but we want to make them to compete with the rest of the world. And these are the skills that we need to make sure that we impact on our learners. So all of this, the interesting part of it is that it's not something new. Technology did not come because of COVID. It didn't come because, now we can have gatherings. It came through the DBE framework. The DBE has got an ICT framework, and it has been there before even the COVID came. The Kst document, it talks about the ICT integration, and it doesn't separate ICT from pedagogy. It doesn't separate it from the content. Teachers have been trained content. They are the specialists of the content. But now we are saying, using these tools, you can effectively teach your learners. Teaching and learning can take place beyond the four walls of the classroom. So I would say, I would definitely agree with what Milford has been saying, to say, even though teachers have been trained on content and they know what to do, they must still understand how to use technology in delivering. And these things are not different. And lastly, change management is going to be very important. We need to win the school managers. We need to win the principals. We need to win our teachers. We need to make sure that they buy into the idea. They understand why are we using. Riyad has spoken about, it's not about keeping on training and training them. It's about saying, what is this device? What does it do? What does it help? Not just you. How does it help your learners? How does it help the economy? How does it help everybody around the world? So I think change management is going to be one of the most important things that we need to do to our schools if we are to win the teaching and learning, integrating technology into our teaching and learning every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. So, Mr. Malloy, I'm sure that when you listen to all of these IT passionate people, it must be a bit intimidating. I certainly am learning a lot. Your strength is you know schools. You know the reality of schools. So we want you to talk in terms of how you see the way forward from the passion that we've heard. And then when you've finished, I'm going to give each of the panel members just 30 seconds in case there's anything else that they want to say before we go to your questions and answers. Over to you, Mr. Malloy.
No, thank you very much. It was really very enriching. But there's one thing, there is no device, ICT device, that can replace a good, knowledgeable teacher. You know, we need a teacher to mitigate, and then we need a teacher to navigate, and then the content to be able to trim the essential from the non-essential. And then for us to really harvest maximum benefit out of the utilization of these ICT devices in our schools, especially the rural and the peri-urban schools. And then the focus should be, you know, and then there is just no way in which, and then you can talk about utilization, you can talk about the benefit, and then if you don't have a gadget. To me, the starting point, Prof, is, and then perhaps we should just enhance the partnership between the public and private and then a sector as espoused in the white paper on e-education and then of 2004. We need to ensure that we really and then follow those guidelines. And then secondly, and then there is just no way in which and then we can win and make sure that we harvest maximum benefit and then out of this partnership, out of the utilization of this and then devices, if we don't have a quality and then teacher quality. You know, I've seen in some of the schools, you may have everything which you may need in order to deliver quality teaching and learning. But if the teacher is not committed, and then the teacher is not passionate, and then the teacher will just do the bare minimum. And then therefore, if we will make sure that, you know, our teachers are motivated, and then they are inspired to use, and then the very same devices, and they love what they are doing, because there is a huge difference. If the teacher does not love teaching, that is why the teaching profession is a profession of love. We have got the right and then teachers in our schools, and then we train them, and then we'll be able and then to harvest and then sufficient benefits. You know what is also important, Prof, and then in the utilization of these devices, we should not leave out the learners as though they are just silent and passive and then recipients and then of the whatever will be turned out and then of these devices. They must be active participants, and then if the teacher is not there, learners must be able to step up and use the devices. Therefore, what is key is it is to ensure that there is going to be sustainability by ensuring that the very same recipients are going to be able to use and are going to be passionate and love it. In so doing, and then our education is not going to be dependent and then from one stream, which is from the teachers. Teaching and learning will be coming from all angles. Will be coming from the parents who must participate actively and then in the teaching and learning of their learners. It will also come from the very same learners. There's nothing as painful as teaching learners who are unwilling, who are not motivated, who don't see the value of being in class. You know, they end up in bunking classes, and then the teacher becomes so demotivated because the learners are not there. Therefore, it is a holistic approach which involves all the role players, all the stakeholders. In so doing, and then we'll definitely make sure that we deliver quality teaching and learning in our schools, despite and then their situations, despite where they are located. Because when you look at the qualities, the habits of good performing schools, whether they may be rural or they may be urban, And then there is just one common denominator. There is discipline, there is dedication, there is time on task, there is active parents' participation, there is effective leadership from both the managers and the governors. And then if we have got all of those, and then we'll be able, and then to make sure that all our schools, they become world-class schools.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Okay, so each of the panelists now have one sentence, no more than a minute, one key message or something that you still want to say. And my order is going to be, oh, where did I write my order? It's going to be Riyadh, Milford, Tom, Mr. Malloy. 1 minute, one sentence. Riyadh, you go.
I think my key thing on this is let's keep our expectations tempered by the reality of what's around us, and let's not look for silver bullets. And also let's use ICT as a way of moving into the fourth industrial revolution in a more holistic way with 21st century skills, and not try and, we find a silver bullet and try and replicate the current classroom.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the next person is Milford. One sentence, 1 minute.
The stakeholder involvement, which Mr. Malloy mentioned, it's very key, and many schools have failed because of that. The involvement of the district itself, their proximity must be close. You don't need a district which will only visit the school twice in a year. That is failing our schools, because they have a good policy, which the national evaluation policy, which they can evaluate the progress of every infrastructure or policy which have been put to school. There are policies which are hindering the progress. For instance, the code of conduct in the schools. There are code of conduct which are saying no cell phones, but you are saying you want to implement ICT in that school, but you are saying no cell phones. That needs to change. So we need to look at that. So, there are some of these few hindrances, but when you have done change management and leadership, I think you are able to bring in all these stakeholders from everywhere, and including especially the district managers. They need to be part of it, and they must use their circuit managers a lot, because we have many schools. Some of them are overwhelmed, they are overloaded, so they are not able to cover the whole.
You guys are not off the hook. There's more questions coming, so you must take a deep breath. I'm going to ask Tom, one sentence, 1 minute, then Mr. Malloy, then I'll hand over for the Q&A. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Actually, I would like to say rolling out a program of ensuring that every learner has got a gadget has to take the same dimension as what the government has tried to achieve for the past years of ensuring that every learner has got a textbook. So it means the government won't be possible for them to do this on alone. It means other stakeholders, the private sector has to come in and chip in and ensure that the way we have won every learner per textbook, every learner per gadget, and those gadgets be having connectivity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Malloy, 1 minute.
Yes. No, to me, education is a societal issue. It will take all of us to make sure that we have in place decent infrastructure in our schools, and then which will teach our learners and then human values. And then everything stands and falls on leadership. And then if we don't have leaders and then who are going to be taking responsibility in addressing the challenges, but not people who are just going to be conveyor belts of all the challenges and problems at our schools, we may experience problems. And lastly to us, it takes passion, it takes commitment and dedication, and then to be in this space, the education space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malloy, and thank you from me to the panelists, because I really learned a lot. So that's the panel that you've heard from. It was December Malloy, Tom Shupukai, Milford Malunga, and Riyadh Ibrahim. Where we are now is that it's 4:05, and we now are going to go into the question and answer session. And this is going to be facilitated by Nathan Pillay and Tabisa Vili from Fazile Derby District. They're going to direct the questions that you've submitted, and they're going to be asking the panelists to respond. So I'm not sure if the panelists realized that they were signing up for such a hardworking afternoon. We've got 20 minutes for this before Cesar Kele comes back and summarizes and does the key takeouts and thank yous, and then we close. So over to Nathan and Davili.
Yeah. Thanks, Mary. And I must say, I'm really enjoying the robust discussions and debates that's happening here on the webinar. And I think, yeah, it's very interesting to see our panelists talk about something that's been on our mind, especially since the start of COVID-19. Mr. Malloy, this question is for you, and it comes from Linda Masango. She's asked a few questions, so I'm sort of trying to incorporate a whole lot of questions into one specific question. So in the beginning of the webinar, you spoke about the divide between your ex-Model C schools, your rural and peri-urban schools, mentioned also the lack of resources, also human resources and capacity. And then on the other hand, we also have Tom speaking about schools having a lot of these resources like smart boards, digital devices, and educators are just not making use of them. What can the district and its partners do to ensure the effective use of the digital devices that are, whether it's even dumped or donated to schools? What can the district do to ensure that it's used effectively, to ensure that we have better, effective, enjoyable lessons presented in class? Yeah, and to ensure that learner outcomes improve. Thank you, Mr. Malloy. You can go ahead and answer.
No, thank you very much for the question from Linda. And then it is true. We do have schools and then which may have a lot and then of these devices and not use them, but we may have schools which may have, you know, very little or nothing at all. And then that is why we'll have now, and then the divide between those which will have and those and then which do not have. But definitely, I want to agree, and then with Linda that, you know, once we have got, and then these devices, and then no matter whether you have got the state of the art or you have got an elementary entry level, the fact is they must be used. And then you use whatever you have. You know, even the basic, you make sure that you use it to the maximum, and then so that you should be and then able and then to be provided with a better one. And then after there's a clear indication that and then the one you have has been used. And then how we can make sure that and then the schools are going to be using them. And then definitely, you know, the word of mouth is very, very important. You need to talk about the utilization of these devices. Now and then in meetings, when you go to school, and then you must check whether they are being used. And then we also make sure that there is timetabling. You know, especially, let me make an example, the timetabling in terms of the use of the computer lab, and then the timetabling in terms of the library. And then once you have got that one, you must also make sure that we have got officials, whenever they visit a school, they must ensure that the gadgets are being used, And then they check the books of the learners, they interview the learners, they interview the teachers. They should not only and then take the word of the principal as the head of the institution on the utilization. We must also make sure that in order for them to be used effectively, teachers and learners do have the know-how. That talks to teacher development, professional development, which to me is very key, that once you provide them, you must make sure that they are able to use them and use them effectively. And then lastly, you must also now align the scholastic performance, the performance of the learners with the available and then resources. It doesn't make sense you have got more resources, but the scholastic performance of the learners is down south. And then therefore, once we have got the resources, even the performance of the learners and then must improve. We have got a typical example and then in this district, Motewa. And then when the partnership with Kst started, and then this district was very low. It was a district in performing at 74% pass rate in the national senior certificate. But once we strengthened and made sure that, and then the partnership is working, and then there is infrastructure, there is a maximum utilization of all the resources. The performance of the district and then improved. We are now a district performing at 87.9, almost 88% performance in the national senior certificate. When you look at it, one of the key contributors to this improved performance, it is the utilization of what we have. Hence, we say it doesn't make sense to have resources, to have the infrastructure, to have the teachers, and then at the end of the day, the performance, and then shows the other way around. Therefore, we make sure that there is clear correlation, solid, between the resources and the scholastic performance. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Molloy, for that insightful answer. Tabisa, over to you. Just unmute, Tabisa.
Thank you. What Tom and others alluded to was the fact that one device per learner is needed, just like textbooks per learner are needed. Therefore, we cannot run away from that. And also what was mentioned was that you start where the learner is with the device that they have. I have a question here from Olwe 2, and I think the question is directed to you, Milford, that what sort of devices would you advocate should be integrated in schools for the most effective and quickest gains? So I will give any of the panelists who would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. Tabisa. Thank you for the question. Though I have indicated in the beginning, I'm not really an advocate for devices. I believe that devices are influenced by the content which has to be taught and pedagogy. So, but the devices which we have seen working in our work in the space of the rural area and the peri-urban is when you look at the connectivity, usually the connectivity is very poor, and we have utilized the VSET as connectivity, which has enabled us, even on those schools which are on the mountain, to utilize. And in terms of the actual gadgets, your gadgets, we have utilized a lot of tablets for learners and laptops for the educators. The reasoning behind the tablets for learners is that they can easily share it. I mean, they can easily put one they can easily share. They can have one gadget and listen to it, and maybe listen to a podcast which the teacher has posted, you know, and quickly share that. Or they can actually immediately use it for taking photos or for doing the recordings of themselves to respond to different activities. So the mobility part of it, for us, it has made sense in terms of that. And looking at different also age groups, you have the primary school, you have the high school. You know, the primary school, they are prone to, it's not really the typing which they are looking for, but it's a lot of pictures they are playing with and the apps which they are utilizing. So it makes sense that the primary schools can utilize the tablets. That's where we have seen it being effective and working. And you have your high school where you are preparing them for the universities to say, okay, you guys are going to do research and other stuff. You can utilize your laptops. But for me, the best gadgets really are what is informed by whatever the children are doing, because we have many who are doing coding, robotics, and Minecraft. They are using their cell phones. So these are kids in the high school. So, you know, one cannot really be specific, but looking at what we want to do with it. Do we want to do coding? We want them to learn using this, which content, which are they learning? So that for me, it informs which gadgets can be utilized at which grade, or FET or GET. I hope that answers your question.
Let's unmute Tabisa.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you, Milford. I think Oluwati's question is answered. Context is very important, especially pedagogical context, from what we heard from a number of panelists here. I also think that most of the questions have been answered by the panelists. I think the question maybe that is there that has not maybe anyone touched on, or it has been partly touched, is how ready are the teachers? There was a question around that. How accepting are they of technology? I think Mr. Moloi touched on that, but maybe we can hear from Tom as well in terms of the readiness of teachers and learners in the use of technology in the young. Thank you.
Thanks, Tabisa. Tom, I think because we're running out of time, I also want to include to the question Tabisa posed to you, to include, you spoke about offline solutions, and someone has asked to just elaborate on how you actually do that and what do you mean by that when learners, when you exchange information offline, what do you actually mean by that and how is it done? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nathan. I know you can see the name Sister Kele there. We are in the same building and I'm struggling with my connectivity. Tabisa, the question, teachers are ready. We have been trained. We are subject specialists and we must be able to adapt to any changes given to us. So it's the responsibility of us as teachers to ensure that any changes that is given to us that ensures that there's effective teaching and learning, we need to run. We need to ensure that we afford our learners the skills that they require. So I would say all we have to do is to make sure that we spend more time in winning the teachers and ensuring that why are we doing this? But in terms of readiness, as a teacher, I am ready now, even if whatever changes that has to happen. So we don't have to have any time frame to say in the next 5 years. We need to be ready now. The same thing we have done to COVID. We have adapted and we have won it. Then Nathan, regarding the issue of offline, I will say it from my personal experience. What I have done with in my schools that I support, that I work with,
is to ensure that since learners do not have connectivity at home, we ensure that we download the content because the school has good Wi-Fi. So we use the school Wi-Fi to do the connect the learner tablets or the learner devices, and learners are able to download whatever material that they're supposed to use, so that when they get home where they are not connected, they're able to view those offline videos or offline materials that they've downloaded. So it means here we are using the school as the one that is connected, and learners download their materials and they can view and study from home offline. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to all the panelists that have addressed the questions posed to them. I see Mr. Malloy wants to say something before we hand over to Mary. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I just want to add on the questions asked by Tabitha and the input made now. I think to me, and then what is key is, in addition to the type, to the suitability of the device, what is key is also the cost. You know, what is the cost in the utilization and then of the device? Because you may have the most suitable device, but if the cost is unaffordable, and then there's data issues, there is Wi-Fi issues, and then that device is not going to be used ultimately. Therefore, we need to make sure that perhaps then we must deal with the question of the cost. And then there are other sites which are zero rated, and then others which may not need data, which is also key in the increased utilization. In terms of the readiness of the teachers and the utilization of these devices, I think I can say without any fear of contradiction that our teachers are ready. And then the utilization of ICT is part and parcel and then of the curriculum. Nationally, even in the provinces, and then we even incentivize and then teachers for effective use of ICT. There is this National Teachers Award, which is a national initiative, and then where teachers who are effectively using ICT are incentivized and celebrated. That goes down to the provinces and also to the districts. And if you can see, and then when these teachers are displaying how they are innovatively using ICT and then in their classroom, and then you will see that really they are ready and willing. And then what is important, and then it is just to make sure that and then they are being supported appropriately and continuously. The support should not be a once-off. It should be a continuous support. If there is a change and then in the device an upgrade, there should also be relevant support in how to use an upgraded and then a device which is in the market. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Malloy. Mary, I think you can take over.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to listening to the tape. So we've managed time very well. Thank you very much to you for managing the question and answers and the panel for their great work. I'm now going to hand over to Kaya Nyati, who's going to do key takeaways, the thank yous, and say goodbye to all of us. But I'm going to propose that actually everybody goes off camera so that we can at least see each other as we leave the session, which has been so engaging, but where you guys have been sending questions. So go off camera so that or go on camera, go on video, so that at least we can see you as Kaya wraps up.
Thank you, Mary. Am I audible? Good afternoon to all our stakeholders on the platform. I have been tasked to give you the key takeouts of this very robust conversation, which we are truly grateful for as KST. And I want to read them as exactly as I picked them up as we were going along. We have taken a total of 9 of these key takeouts for us to note, and I want to read them as they are. The first one being that COVID-19 has catalyzed the conversation and implementation of ICT integration in the schools. Although there is documentation referring to the integration of ICT to learning, this process has been rather slow. As a result of the pandemic, schools have been pushed to a corner to explore the power of technology more proactively. This is both private and public space observation, according to the panelists. The second one is that the use of ICT in schools is not a cut and paste of the classroom experience. Rather, there needs to be investment in identifying more effective ways of using ICT in the classroom. There needs to be work in changing the attitudes of teachers and learners around the use of ICT. One needs to share a clearly articulated value proposition of these technologies and thereby creating a demand for the technology instead of just focusing on supply. It is also important to start working with what is available. Some schools have access to some devices, and one needs to focus on empowering educators and learners to use these devices more effectively where they are available. The fifth of the 9 points is that it is also important to have ICT resources available to schools. There is evidence that shows that schools that have access to these resources are doing better than those that don't have. Therefore, there has to be deliberate investment towards ensuring that schools have access to ICT resources. And I think this is a clear clarion call for support in the partnership. Number 6, it is important to have effective training support. One of the challenges that have been identified is that educators and learners do not know how to use these resources. Therefore, training support is required. That is teacher development and learner development equally. These need to be supported with value demonstration and buy-in on the part of the educators. Number 7 of the 9 points is that there needs to be a demand pool created for the use of technology instead of a supply push approach towards the integration of technology. Number 8, the conversation affirmed that there is an inequality gap between private and public schools, and this inequality is centered around access. The last point that we captured is that technology cannot operate in isolation. Rather, it must be rooted in content and pedagogy. Those fellow stakeholders are the key takeouts that we got out of the engagement. With your permission, facilitator, Professor Metcalf, I will proceed now to the next part of my presentation, which is to thank our participants here. And I think as we approach the closing of the gathering, on behalf of KST trustees, its board members, our partners, which is the Department of Education in the Free State, and the First Rand Empowerment Foundation, our donors and all our stakeholders, I thank you, sincerely so, for the time you took out to listen, engage, and respond to this event. It is indeed one that was designed to inspire you into supporting the work that we do in the Free State's Mutewa and Fesle-David districts. Judging by the robustness of the engagements, I can confirm that we achieved that goal. We thank you, and we thank you in advance for the seed sowing you are going to be doing in support of the district whole school development model. Thank you, Professor Metcalf. Thank you, Mary, as we call you. for running this program so seamlessly and for facilitating the conversation today to flow as beautifully as it did. And thank you for provoking and challenging our panelists to dig deeper within themselves. They indeed rose to the occasion. We thank you, and we thank you sincerely. To our panelists and the other program speakers today, thank you so much for your dedication to our work. Thank you for the time and everything else that you put into making today so wonderful, sharing your knowledge and passion with all of us. You inspired our participants to stick with the conversation to the end. We thank you for that. If it wasn't for you, we could have lost them much earlier. We look forward to engaging and seeing you again soon on either of our communication and connection platform, which is our website, on our social media pages, and even on email or by physical conversation. We thank you again. We thank you sincerely as an organization. We have now come to the end of our program for the day with much gratitude. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Just bye.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Nathan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lisa. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Taya, Sizakele. So, I'm off. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.